is we're doing a study on Joseph for the next 3 weeks after this, so 4 weeks in total, and advancement from the pit to the palace, because we're continuing to focus on our word for the year. Excuse me. Hello, toadies, welcome in.
Greetings, thank you.
So we're gonna jump right in, and I'm super excited because I think that I don't know if I want to say that. Let me think. Am I gonna change my mind about this? Okay, I'll do top three. Top three, I guess, Bible stories, if you want to call it that, or like Bible stuff, characters. David, of course, is number one, for those of you who didn't know. And then somewhere between 2 and 3 would probably be Joseph and Joshua. And so I'm super excited to talk about Joseph, and I'm super excited to kind of break it down because I think that we can kind of tend to jump to the palace, but kind of disregard all the things that it took for Joseph to get to that place. And so I'm excited for diving deep into it. Samson is another of my favorite ones, even though that story is kind of dark, and Samson really gets on my nerves because he was just so foolish and just lacked wisdom. And yeah, but anyways, okay, yeah, maybe I'll do top 5. Okay, but so I'm super excited to kind of dive into Joseph, and my prayer for us tonight is that we wouldn't be so quick to jump ahead, to where we know Joseph is eventually going to go, for those of us who are familiar with the story of Joseph in the Bible, but that we would really be able to see ourselves step by step and be able to find value in what the Word of God is teaching us at every step. As we go throughout the book of Genesis and as we discuss Joseph's story from the pit to the palace. Okay. I hope I did a good job introing.
Okay.
I just feel like it's a lot of pressure to start a series off. I like to come in kind of in the middle, but
show me up.
I'll be I have a few things coming up over the next couple of weeks. The month of May is just super, super busy. So tonight was the only night that I would be able to not be distracted enough to actually share with you guys some of the things that God put on my heart. So I'm excited about it. All right, so if you're familiar with the book of Genesis, you know that the kind of, I guess, second half of it is where we'll be focused at for our Bible study. So we're going to pick up in Genesis 37, and we are going to read, okay? But there's not going to be a whole lot of scripture tonight in terms of like different verses and stuff. We're just going to primarily, there are a couple of other ones that I kind of threw in there in the last minute because I was like, oh, I got to say that. But we're primarily going to be focused on Genesis 37 for tonight. So a little backstory, just as a reminder, if you guys haven't read this in a while or thought about Joseph in a while. So Jacob is basically, in foreign land, Canaan, and Joseph is where we're picking up on chapter 37. But one thing I want to mention about Joseph is that he is the son of Jacob and Rachel.
Mm-hmm.
Why did I say Rebecca? I don't know. He's the son of Joseph, or the son of Jacob and Rachel. I want to keep saying Rebecca. And he is the firstborn son of Rachel.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the son that was born to Rachel and Jacob in Jacob's older age. You have to remember that Jacob worked to for the opportunity to marry Rachel. I don't know why I'm struggling with that. But and he was swindled by his father-in-law into marrying the ugly sister. And so he had to get her first. And then he got swindled again to work another 7 years. So basically he worked 14 years for this woman. And she was barren. So the Lord blessed them with Joseph in his older age. And I'd also like to mention that Rachel also passed away. So that kind of gives a little bit of context to what we're going to read, and probably some of Jacob's affinity toward Joseph. All right, so let's go ahead and pick up in chapter 37 of Genesis, verse 1. Can I have somebody to read that? Can we read from about, let's see how many verses? It is about 35 verses. Can somebody read chapters 1 or verses 1 through 17? And then somebody else will read the rest.
I can start. Any particular version?
No.
Okay. I'll do see. All right. So, well, okay, I'll do ESV. All right. Jacob lived in the land of his father. Nope, we're not doing that. Nope. All right. NLT. So Jacob settled again in the land of Canaan, where his father had lived as a foreigner. This is the account of Jacob and his family. When Joseph was 17 years old, he often tended to his father's flock. He worked for his half-brothers, the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah. That's why you gave it to us to read. But Joseph reported to his father some of the bad things his brothers were doing. Excuse me. Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. So one day Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful robe. But his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest of them. They couldn't say a kind word to him. One night Joseph had a dream, and when he told his brothers about it, they hated him more than ever. Listen to this dream, he said. We were out in the field tying up bundles of grain. Suddenly my bundles stood up and your bundles all gathered around and bowed low before mine. His brothers responded, so you think you will be our king, do you? Do you actually think you will reign over us? They hated him all the more because of his dreams and the way he talked about them. Soon Joseph had another dream, and again he told his brothers about it. Listen, I have had another dream, he said. The sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed low before me. This time he told the dream to his father as well as his brothers. But his father scowled at him. What kind of dream is that? He asked. Will your mother and I, your brothers, actually come and bow to the ground before you? But while his brothers were jealous of Joseph, his father wondered what the dream meant. Soon after this, Joseph's brothers went to pasture their father's flock at Shechem. No, Shechem. When they had been gone for some time, Jacob said to Joseph, your brothers are pasturing the sheep at Shechem. Get ready and I will send you to them. I'm ready to go, Joseph replied. Go and see how your brothers and the flocks are getting along, Jacob said. Struggling tonight, y'all, sorry. Then come back and bring me a report. So Jacob sent him on his way, and Joseph traveled to Shechem from their home in the valley of Hebron. When he arrived there, a man from the area noticed him wandering around the countryside. "What are you looking for?" he asked. "I'm looking for my brothers," Joseph replied. "Do you know where they are pasturing their sheep?" "Yes," the man told him. "They have moved on from here, but I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" So Joseph followed his brothers to Dothan and found them there.
Okay, so that was a good bit of text. So we'll pause there before we move on to verse 18. So a couple of questions that I want to ask about what we just read, and also for you to keep in mind when we finish out the chapter. What are some things that you noted either about Joseph or about his family members?
I can do it.
You got it?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, okay. So what are some things that you guys notice in these first 17 verses? Some questions that I wrote down. What do you notice about Joseph? What do you notice about his brothers? Or what do you notice about his father? What do you notice about his brothers and father's thoughts toward him?
What stood out to me was when Joseph told the dream, his brothers were jealous of him, but his father was actually curious about what the dream meant. And I never really paid attention to that before. And it's just evident of how his relationship with Joseph is a fond one, whereas the brothers, obviously, there's some sort of animosity and extraness. But yeah, that was what stood out to me.
Mhm. Okay. Anybody else?
I noticed that, I mean, I noticed a lot of stuff within this, but I'll just say, just even with the brothers that, the ones that I guess the whole Billa and Zilpha were the ones that I guess NLT says he worked for them. Other ones don't necessarily say that as directly, but either way, it's just interesting. Those are Rachel's kids. And so I mean not Rachel, sorry. Father's wives of Billa and Zilpha. Okay, so
They were Rachel's servants.
Rachel's servant, sorry, yes. And so it's just interesting to me how within the family, like those were the ones that I guess like he kind of met with. It's interesting that Jacob sent Joseph to give a report. At first, we're told that he that Joseph would tell his father what things they did wrong, but then later we find out that Jacob sends him. And lastly, I would say yeah, it's just interesting how much just their hatred was because more so of their father's love, and then also like the favor that was on his life from his father, and then just how threatened they felt with just the dreams, like, yeah, whatever, like, because they dislike him, like they just also despise the dream. So I don't know, I just found that interesting that it's not even necessarily that something Joseph did to them. It was just who he was seen to be and what he began to articulate that they despised. And of course, who likes to be told on? But if you do the right thing, then you'll be told on. But anyway, that's neither here nor there.
Mhm. So how would you describe Joseph? Like, what are some characteristics of Joseph that you noticed?
He seems to be confident, based off of his willingness to boldly announce the dream, despite what it was saying. Like, it's not really that favorable for everybody else, but he's just like, hey. There also could be an aspect of pureness to that, to where, to the pure all things are pure. So he didn't really see anything wrong with it until probably he got the response. But yeah, those are my thoughts.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody, anything else?
I like that because some people try to make Joseph out to be arrogant and like just like your brothers didn't like you did it up, but it's like we don't really know that. Just look like reading some commentary stuff like that. It's like, but where is that? Like, how do we know that that was really his heart? Like, you know how you have some of those people, kind of like what you were saying, Leslie. It's just like they just so oblivious. It's like they just themselves. And it's like, yo, do you have no social like awareness to the way you're coming off, the way you like, I get it, but that might not have been the best thing to say in this moment. Like, hello? Okay, no. So yeah, I like that perspective.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts? So one of the things I was thinking in line with that was because did we get to that part yet? I can't remember, but I can't remember if we read this yet or not. It's all merging together in my head, but I think we've gotten to the part where it says that his brothers hated him, and they didn't have anything kind to say to him.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I thought about that, I just thought about like he was conditioned to be like mistreated, basically. Like you are so accustomed to being, that's a spider. You're accustomed to being mistreated, and so it doesn't even necessarily faze you when someone is kind of doing you wrong, so to speak. There could also be just like this underlying thing of, I don't know, like people pleasing, wanting for people to kind of like you and not necessarily knowing when you are being kind of socially awkward because you're trying to like share or, like, well, this is cool. I had this cool dream. It just happened that you would bow to me one day, but this was a fun dream. What do you think? And so that's something that I kind of, okay, it's moving. But that's something that I kind of think about,
I know, I had a thought, but I didn't want to lose it. Sorry.
It's a small one. I've seen bigger ones here. A homeowner line. Really?
Did it go in your water? We went over there.
But so yeah, so that was kind of some of the thoughts that I had.
Also, go ahead, Leslie. Okay.
One of the things that I'm saying is just that he was Jacob's son in his old age, so he was like the youngest. I know they was thinking after him, but it was like one of the young sons that he had. So I'm just looking at him, knowing like he has elder brothers that were older than him. So seeing how he's sharing and not really being aware of, I would say, like they had with other brothers, I think it's because, like when you have other brothers, you look up to them. So that's what I'm like seeing, as in I think he looks up to these people, as in, he was like, I have brothers, but his brothers didn't look at him like that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I can see that. I mean, I don't have, brothers, and there's a different kind of relational dynamic between me and my sister because she's so much older than me. But even with our girls, you can kind of see that a little bit. Like Like, Zuri, you ain't about to keep dogging my baby out, okay? You're not about to keep mistreating her.
Right.
And then want her to be your friend
Right.
later when you're bored. You're not about to keep doing that to my baby.
Several hours.
But like, there's just like this need in Avi to just be with her sister,
Second born.
do what her sister does,
Middle children.
like just love on and be around her. And even like if something is going on with Zuri, like if she hurts herself, why is Nehemiah looking guilty? Like,
Right.
what are you up to? He's looking like, she looking at me.
She talking about me. No, I'm not talking about you.
But yeah, like there's just this need for like when Zuri's hurt or crying, like Zuri Avi is so affectionate toward her and it's so genuine, and just, Zuri, are you okay? Zuri crying, mommy, and then go and get her some tissue and give her hugs. Unless she, made her cry, then she don't really care. But if she's crying for some other reason. But yeah, so I can definitely see that, Harry. And I think, yeah, I can see that even in them. Like, they love each other.
But
they just they fight. They just, and it's weird. I'm always asking like my friends who have siblings kind of closer in their age range, like, hey, is this normal? Are they supposed to be fighting like this? Or like, what's going on? Why don't they love each other? There's just, you just have to teach them how to interact with each other, teach them how to engage, and help them to learn those life skills now, so that when they are older, they will actively and more appropriately love one another. But yeah.
The other thought I had, and it's kind of going back to the other question, but what do we notice about the brothers and stuff like that? When I was going through this and preparing beforehand, one thing I noticed that stood out to me this time was that, wow, like, notice that the brothers had the ability to interpret dreams. Like, I never picked that up before. Like, this is something that was already in the family, because both times, like, that he was like, hey, I had a dream, but Joseph didn't say what the dream meant. It was them who said, oh, so what you trying to say we're gonna buy? Oh, so you're trying to say you're gonna be king? He's like, I just had a dream. So that was interesting to me. But just how, like, sometimes some spiritual giftings kind of run within families or similar type things, and how like they kind of pass down. But sometimes the ones who get to actually do great things with it are the ones that who are able to be trusted, who have the character, who have the really heart for God. And basically you can tell they have God's favor on their life to actually see it be used for good. So yeah, I'm like, man, if these brothers weren't so evil and bad, and y'all were able to see this here, like, what could y'all have done? But yeah, that was a thought I had.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that I thought about too, in terms of just the affection and the love that Jacob showed toward Joseph, is like kind of it's almost like family trauma being passed down.
Yeah.
Because if you think about his relationships with his mom and dad, Jacob and Esau, and how there was kind of a split or a conflict even in their relationship. So it's almost like Jacob perpetuated this same type of split and conflict between his children by showing favoritism in a way that his children could definitely understand and interpret as he's loved more than me. And so, yeah, it's kind of just like, as parents, you're not supposed to have favorites. In the moment, my favorite is whoever's being the most obedient. But like, it's just kind of like, I never want to pin my children against one another, And I could sense kind of, or at least, I think that perhaps Jacob understood that, because when Joseph shared the dream the second time, he rebuked him, but at the same time was curious. And so I wonder if he might have rebuked Joseph for the sake of his siblings. And also because in the second dream, he said the sun and moon and 11 or 12 stars or something like that. I think he said 11. 11 stars. And so if you think about it, he had 11 siblings. The sun and moon would be his mom and his dad. And so that's why Jacob is like, wait, you gonna bring your mom in this? So you're trying to say that we gonna bow to you? So he was curious, but at the same time, some of the other translations suggest that was kind of like an inner curiosity, as opposed to the overt rebuke or the scolding that he gave to Joseph. And so that was one of the things that I noticed too. I did say, so he was trustworthy. These are characteristics that I noted about Joseph. I keep getting mixed up, Jacob and Joseph, but he was trustworthy. He was young. Some say he was arrogant. Some say he was helpful or pure. His daddy was rich, but he knew how to work. And then he was favored. He was loved. And I added what Leslie just said. He seemed to be competent. In contrast to that, his brothers hated him. His brothers interpreted favor as favoritism. And so that caused a deep-rooted hatred toward him, to the point where they would do what we're about to read about. But so let's go ahead and pick back up on verse 18. We're still in Genesis chapter 37, verse 18. Anybody want to read that?
I read.
Thanks.
Okay. They saw him in the distance, and before he had reached them, they plotted to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes that dreamer. Come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of the pits. We can say that a vicious animal ate him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams." Where am I reading to?
All the way down.
Okay. When Reuben heard this, he tried to save him from them. He said, "Let's not take his life." Reuben also said to them, "Don't shed blood. Throw him into this pit in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him," intending to rescue him from their hands and return him to the father. When Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped off his robe, the robe of many colors that he had on. Then they took him and threw him into the pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat a meal. They looked up, and there was a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were carrying aromatic gum, balsam, and resin, going down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What do we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay a hand on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And they agreed. When Midianite traders passed by, his brothers pulled Joseph out of the pit and sold him for 20 pieces of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took Joseph to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. He went back to his brothers and said, "The boy is gone. What am I going to do?" So they took Joseph's robe, slaughtered a young goat, and dipped the robe in its blood. They sent the robe of many colors to their fathers and said, "We found this. Examine it. Is it your son's robe or not?" His father recognized it. "It is my son's robe," he said. "A vicious animal has devoured him. Joseph has been torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth around his waist, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters tried to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. "No," he said, "I will go down to Sheol to my son mourning." And his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and the captain of the guard.
Okay, so any thoughts here? What do you notice about, or what stood out to you in these verses?
During the whole time, Joseph said absolutely nothing.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I noticed is that I don't think the brothers threw him in the pit, but I don't think that the brothers trusted Reuben, because notice they even lied to him. Like at this point, Reuben is under the assumption that Joseph is dead too. Because they didn't say it's like, no, we just sold him. They were just like, look at like this, the boy is gone, what do I do now? And then the brothers killed the goat or whatever, and then basically they went and covered it up. Like they didn't tell Reuben that no, this is what we did. It was just Reuben like he's gone, so let's come up with a story. So Reuben, like you're trying to find people please or please your brothers while at the same time still being the firstborn and living up to your name and trying to, you know what I mean? Some people say he was a coward. Some people says like, he was planning the scheme or whatever to, get him out and be like the hero in the situation. Pick your side. But at the end of the day, it's just like, it's interesting to see how the brothers, to me, there's a lack of trust that they even had that of Reuben to even tell him the truth. So they didn't tell Joseph the truth, nor did they tell their father. Reuben the truth, nor their father the truth.
Mm-hmm.
But they were all willing to cover it up and hold on to it, even in their father's deep weeping. Like they didn't break. That's crazy. But yeah.
Yeah. So I guess with that in mind, how would you describe his brothers?
His brothers, whew. I mean, when I was just looking at the kind of things that they're coming up with, like these are permanent things. It's not like they just was like, okay, let's play a trick on him. Let's tie him to a tree. It's like they're literally going from bad to worse. Like it's one thing to leave him in the pit. Like there's no compassion, no nothing for him. Like they're treating him as if he's not a human, much less their brother. But aside from that, to sell him is just like, we don't ever want to see him again. Like they don't have any sort of longing affection that's like, no, we can't do this. Nothing is stopping them. So they're like ruthless. And it's like, I don't know what could drive them that far. It's not like a regular sibling type of rivalry. Like this is like some sort of deep hatred.
Mm-hmm.
It's a spirit that ran through the family. It's the
That's
fact
true.
that Jacob even did what he did to Esau and then left or whatever. And then, all the stuff like your uncle schemed you. Like they just awesome. It's a spirit of just wickedness and a spirit that just has run through and it hasn't been cut off yet.
Wow. That's really good. Yeah. That's really good. And I think that that's something to ponder, honestly, because when I think about kingdom advancement, when I think about us fulfilling our kingdom assignment, knowing our kingdom purpose, fulfilling our kingdom assignment, some of us are pioneers in our families. Like some of us are forerunners in our families. And so as we're out here trying to do what God has called us to do, some of the opposition that we'll face will be in our own families. Like, we know where the story is going, so we know that there will be opposition external to Joseph's family that will eventually be used to get him to fulfilling his kingdom assignment. But I think that's probably very surprising sometimes when that happens, when you meet opposition or resistance, or even some of the same characteristics, maybe not to this extreme to where, you know, your brother want to kill you. But even, you know, well, maybe to that extreme, because, well, I guess I won't say that. But there have been instances, even in my own family, where some of my aunts and uncles have been very physical with one another, to the point where they could have harmed one another, and it could have eventually led to death, because of the deep-rooted hatred, and also because of demonic. And so I think that's something to keep in mind as we set out and as we accept the call on our lives as kingdom people, kingdom leaders who decide that we want to go and do what God has called us to do. And I'm thinking about this too, and perhaps we'll talk about this a little bit later as we continue in Joseph's story, but sometimes it does call for a separation in order for us to become who God called us to be. So if you know that you have a kingdom purpose, and you know that you have a kingdom assignment, you know that God has fashioned you to do something specific to advance the kingdom of God, and you feel stagnant and you feel stuck, you might need to examine who is around you. Or if you are just kind of floating through your Christianity or through your walk, and you don't feel that you have an assignment or a purpose or something that God has given you to be intentional about, you may need to examine who is around you. You may need to examine your relationships. You may need to examine how you've prioritized even family relationships sometimes. So that was a side note, but I really do feel like that was important to say. But yeah, if we're going to be about our Father's business, sometimes that means that we are breaking familial strongholds. Sometimes we are pushing back against demonic forces that have wreaked havoc on our families for generations. And I would dare say, for our children's sake and our children's children's sake, we have to respond to the call to advance God's kingdom using the gifts and the talents and the skills that he's given us. We have to be that serious about what God has called us to do. We have to be that serious about our kingdom assignment. We have to be that undistracted, that unwavering, because generations are at stake. I don't want my children to have to battle the things that have been battled in my bloodline for decades and generations. That's just not what I desire for them. And neither is that what either of us should desire for our children. And I don't mean that to place us in fear, because God hasn't given us a spirit of fear, but that is a spirit, you know? And so we have to denounce and break away from that and break association with that and choose his love, which casts out fear. But I'm saying that to help us to know that us walking in our purpose, our calling, advancing is urgent, and not just for us.
One thing I'll add to that, your relatives or people might not be trying to kill you, but it's also seen in, oh, they just think they're better than us, or you think you're better than us, or how come you do this, that, and the third? Like, I don't know, just sometimes in answering the call, people misunderstand, but it's just really the favor in your life that just make a strong contrast between the way they live and the way you choosing to live, because you're choosing to actually live the life God has called you to live versus living life for yourself. And so, like, yeah, Joseph might have should not have like shared the dream or shared in the way that he did to them, or maybe he should have had more discernment not to share with his brothers. But at the end of the day, two things I would say is, one, God clearly allowed it because he was going to use it to help move him where he wants to be. So he allowed it to happen. And then two, it's one of those things where, like, yeah, like you can't, as much as it hurts, sometimes you're just different. You're set apart, you're called apart. And I remember one of the things that was always said to me by my parents is like, you're not better. You're not whatever, you're not better than them or whatever the case may be, but it's just we have made different choices for you. And yeah, like this is the standard that we've set, and yeah, like it's just different. Better off maybe, but at the end of the day, we know where we want you to go and we know what we see in you, and it's not in the direction that they're going. So yeah, there is going to be a difference and a contrast. And so even when they say, oh, you think you're better than us, or oh, like you, whatever, you have to know within yourself what's your kingdom identity and operate from that.
Mhm. One of the things I want to make sure that we don't overlook is the characteristics of the pit itself. Because I think in the midst of everything that's going on, it might be easy to overlook that. So the characteristics of the pit itself, which we see in verse 24, they grabbed him and they threw him into the pit. It was empty and it had no water. Other things that we should know, it's likened to a well, it's underground, it's man-made, it's at this point waterproof, and it's probably cold. And yeah, and so I don't want us to kind of miss that this is the place that he was in for however long it took them to devise another plan, basically.
Let alone sit and eat.
Yeah, in essence, which is further messed up. Like, dang, y'all just chilling. You just eating some bread while I'm over here. He was probably at this point screaming out, yelling out, crying out for help, hoping that someone would assist him. And so what would happen, it would look like, on the surface, it would look like a kind of smaller hole in the ground. And then underneath it would get bigger. And so what they would do is they would put a stone and some other just things over the hole to seal it, and to basically make it to where people who were walking by would not fall into it. And then also to conceal it so that either animals or other people wouldn't steal water when it was not empty, basically. And so he was pretty much sealed off. It's probably dark, cold, he's alone. And the reason why I wanted to point out the characteristics of the pit is because when we're thinking about kingdom advancement, there will be seasons where we feel like we're facing some of those same characteristics. And so the part that I wanted to kind of go in to next is kind of the pit itself and what it teaches us about, or what it shows us. Let me see, how did I say this? I said Genesis 37 shows us a few things to keep in mind about kingdom advancement and fulfilling our kingdom assignment. And so I wanted to kind of go through that. But before I did that, here's something that I wrote down. The pit in and of itself, because remember, this Bible study is called Favor in the Pit, right?
Mhm.
So how can a place that is empty, that is without sustenance, there is no light, it is cold, it is lonely, it is hidden, it is covered, it's sealed off, how can that place be a place of favor? And so what I wanted to kind of draw out and make sure that we didn't miss is one of the primary reasons I believe that the pit was a place of favor is because it gave just enough time for the enemy to second guess, for the accusers to reposition themselves. Because remember, they had 3 separate plans, right? First, they were going to kill him and throw him in there. Then they say, okay, no, let's just put him in there and let him die. A slow death, a lonely death, a cold death. Let's just let him die.
Mhm.
And then their final plan was, okay, no, we're going to sell him. Okay. And then Reuben had his own plan, like, okay, no, we're not going to kill him because we don't want the blood on our hands. But then we're going to put him in there, and then I'm going to get him, bring him to his daddy. And then if you think about it too, just the actually, I don't want to talk about that yet, but yeah, so they put him in the pit, and then they sell him, further saying, like, further kind of deepening a wound. So not only have you been in this place that's lonely, dark, isolated for God knows how long they left him in there. And God knows how long or what they did to him before, like as they ripped him of his jacket. Did they beat him up, or like what happened? How did they get him in there? And I don't imagine, I read somewhere that the pits were like 7 to 12 feet deep. And so it wasn't as if they just like stuffed him in there. Like he had to be thrown in there, and then he fell a few feet. And so he probably hurt himself, if not physically, definitely emotionally, definitely spiritually. And so that's something to also keep in mind too. And I think that there are so many parallels. First of all, Joseph is a type of Jesus. If we're thinking about biblical typology, he's a type of Jesus. So basically he's foreshadowing the things that we will see in Jesus. And it's no coincidence that the one who sold him was called Judah, so it's just those parallels. But then also the parallels that we see in our own lives as we fulfill God's purpose, as we obey and do what he's called us to do. And so I wrote favor in the pit because in being placed in the pit, the enemy's plans were rerouted, which positioned Joseph for his destiny. While he was in the pit, it gave them, his brothers, an opportunity to rethink, to second guess themselves. And so I said, don't despise the pits. It's no secret that they are a place of both preservation and preparation. And so Genesis 37 shows us a few things to keep in mind about kingdom advancement and fulfilling our kingdom assignment. The first thing that I want us to note is there will be pits. There will be places of isolation. There will be places of loneliness. There will be places where we feel like we're hidden. There will be places where we feel like it's silent, where it's dark, where we can't see the light. There will be places where it feels cold and like we're uncovered. There will be places in our walk, in our journeys, where we feel those things. See, the issue, what did I write down? I said, we often dream of the palace and are at times surprised when we find ourselves feeling underground. And then in addition to that, or like we are in this empty place. I know that many of us, we've been walking with the Lord long enough to know what it feels like, to know that there's life going on around us, but still feel isolated and empty. and like no one understands, and heck, we don't even understand what's going on. And so there will be pits. And oftentimes it's good that the Lord gives us these visions of what is to come. But what is to come, or our destiny, our purpose, our kingdom assignment, is not a landing place. It's not a destination. When we reach that kingdom assignment, that's only a sign of progression and God's faithfulness, not that we've arrived, not that we've made it. And so sometimes we have this kingdom picture, or we have this mission in our hearts or in our minds and in our eyesight, but we get into these pits and we're like, wait a minute, why am I here? Why am I in this place? Because this looks nothing like what you promised me, which was the second thing I wrote. The pit looks nothing like the promise, but don't get discouraged. Be not weary in your well-doing. Because why was Joseph there in the first place? He was honoring a request that was given to him by his father. So either he really loved his father, really honored his father, and or he really cared for his brothers, because he's out. So when he's going, he's out in the wilderness to the point where someone has to come and ask him like, hey, you okay? What you looking for? And he's like, I'm looking for my brothers. Have you seen where they are? Now, if he just wanted to do the bare minimum, he could have just said, hey, they're not here. I don't know where they went, and went back to his dad.
They're not where they're supposed to be.
Basically. But what he did was he took it a step further. He actually vigorously looked for them. And to me, that is the sign of a kingdom leader. That is the sign of someone who wants to be used, someone who wants to show honor. And that's the heart of many of us in this Bible study. We desire for God to use us. Our intentions are good. Our heart is postured in the right direction. It's just we get lost in it sometimes. And so don't get discouraged when you find yourself in a place that doesn't look like the promise of God. Like, God, you said this, and I know your word says that, and I received prophecies, multiple ones about this. And so how am I to advance when what I see right now does not look like what you promised me?
Yeah.
And so there will be pits, there will be moments where we don't feel like, or don't look like, it doesn't seem like what we're walking through currently, what we're walking through in a moment looks like what God promised. But a cistern would never look like a palace. A pit could never look like a palace, but it's a necessary part of the journey. So don't be surprised when you find yourselves in a pit. And then when you are in a pit, I think it's really important for us to ask, is God preparing me, and or is God preserving me? Because sometimes we will try to, oh wait, did I delete that? Oh, okay, that's coming up later. Is he preparing me, or is he preserving me? Because sometimes we'll try to rush out of those moments and just be like, Lord, just get me through this. I'm guilty of that. Lord, I just want to get to the other side. Get me out of here. Rescue me from this pit. But there are lessons to learn at every phase of our journey, whether we're in the pit or in the palace. And then one of the things that I will say as well, look at the people around you. There will be naysayers and people who do not intend you any good in your family, in your friendship circles. There will be, even the ones you previously found favor with. You will be despised and even mocked. We'll see what comes of his dreams now. Not everyone is going to agree with you choosing to say yes to the call on your life. That doesn't mean that you get to be rude and abrasive and rash. That doesn't mean that. Doesn't mean that you have to be defensive. You don't have to be you don't have to defend because you already have a defender. So you don't have to defend yourself. Doesn't mean that you have to do all that. And then one of the things that was just really like, this right here, guys, what I'm about to share with you was revelatory to me. And I think I might try to camp out here for just a minute, but pray for wisdom so that you don't walk into the traps of your accusers or enemies. What happened with Joseph? He was unable to discern that his brothers did not intend good for him, that his brothers intended to harm him. It doesn't appear that their hatred toward him was concealed very well. And so don't become a victim of naivety. Don't become a victim of just pulling the wool over your own eyes. Look at the people around you. Do they intend good for you? What is the fruit of their life? If Joseph is reporting back to Jacob the wicked things or the bad things that his brothers are doing, that should have been a red flag. So for you to go to places uncovered, for you to go to places unarmored because of a trust relationship, it lessens his discernment. And so I wanted to cross-reference that with Matthew 10. So let's go to Matthew 10 really quickly. But before I do, any thoughts on that? I know I shared a lot. I'll give you a brief recap. There will be pits. The pits look nothing like the promise. Ask yourself if God is preparing or preserving. There will be naysayers and people who do not intend well for you, and you need to pray for wisdom so that you don't walk into the traps of your accusers. Any thoughts?
On the is God preparing or preserving me? Don't rush into the moment, rush to get out of the moment. Another thought I had with that is sometimes your pit allows you to see the true nature of those around you. Actually, that went with the naysayers. It gets to it gives you the opportunity to show those who are around you. Sometimes God will allow things to happen and you have to sit in it because you've been allowing yourself to be so naive that like you have to face the reality of how people really feel about you, how they really see you, how they're treating you. So that was one thought. But at the same time, be mindful that this is not God trying to get you to have a hardened heart towards them. And we'll see that later when we get to the end of his response to them. We know the story, but think about it. Like if Joseph would allow his heart to be hardened, like Israel would not have been saved. So he allowed it to see, but be mindful that it's for discernment, not for revenge or vengeance or whatever. The other thought I had was earlier we mentioned too that Joseph didn't say anything or whatever. And I was reading a commentary and something they pointed out. I'm gonna jump ahead. And I'm gonna relate it. I'm gonna jump ahead for a moment, but in Genesis 40, dang it, I lost it. I want to say it was 42:21. It says, speaking among themselves, clearly we're being punished because of what we did to Joseph long ago. We saw his anguish when he pleaded for his life, but we wouldn't listen. That's why we're in this trouble. So one of the things, so like we kind of ran forward just to come back. Sometimes even when Tiff was talking about being not weary, sometimes you have to be mindful. Don't condemn yourself for having the reality and emotions of like, hey, help, get me out. Like, don't condemn yourself. But then it's almost like the prodigal son, when you come to your senses, when you get to that moment where you come to your senses And when you get to the moment where you're being brought up, or you get to the moment of like settling down from the initial whatever, like remember, like be not weary. It's like God is faithful to his promise. And so sometimes we do have moments like, God, what is going on? We have those emotions. Like we have those moments where mentally we're like, what in the world? Where we're in this deep anguish. But we have to remember, we have to go back to the throne of grace. We have to make sure we keep our hearts and our minds pure before God, so that when he does bring us out, we can still have the character that fuels God wanting to, or not wanting to, but God continuing to add and give, lay on the favor on our lives, and for us to continue to be fruitful in the seasons and not be hurt. Think about all the times like people at church hurt, so they run away, they turn, or hurt, family hurt, run away, they turn, but not realizing it's like you were still supposed to be productive because you're headed to the palace, but you allowed the bitterness of what happened at the onset to prevent you from being elevated and trusted to do greater than what it is just about you. So anyway, yeah, I just want to add that, those two things.
I think I would say something that is kind of like a woven theme through everything is intimacy with God is always a weapon. When I think about, being placed in a position where you recognize like, oh snaps, like the people around me, they hate me, you know what I mean? Like just being realistic. But then coming to realize it's not my job to respond with hatred. So that sweet spot being just what Jesus said, like love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. No matter what the pit looks like, if it looks like it's a pit in the sense that it's a literal pit because someone threw you in it, or if it's like a place of all the things that come with the pit, like the isolation, the loneliness, so on and so forth. All of it is always an opportunity to cultivate intimacy with the Father, because in that intimacy is how we find our way forward and how we continue to bear his fruit and produce the character that he's desiring to use those situations to shape us. So of course, with everything, it's kind of like a no-brainer, but at the same time, it really is in those moments that those things have to ring loudest in our ear, because it is so easy to be in a position where your emotions and your circumstances completely blind you to the access to the Father that is available. And he never intends for us to be without him. So it's like, even in everything, no matter how deep the pit is and how empty it is, his presence is there. So it's like, that's where we're supposed to be filled the most.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I was gonna say too, and I personally struggle with this, because if you're gonna accuse me, I'm gonna let you know that you're wrong about the lie you just told. But one of the things that the Lord is helping me to see, like right now in this season, is you don't have to address the people who accuse you, but you do have to address the voice of the accuser, the spirit of the accuser. You have to address that.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you'll begin to take on the identity of the lies that were spoken against you. Mm-hmm. And so there's nothing noble about keeping your mouth closed when you speaking over those lies could result in your freedom. Because if you don't address the voice of the accuser, you will be stuck in the pit. And it'll be a pit that you threw yourself into. Mm-hmm. So I think that that's something that has to be said as well. Like, we aren't always called to go and talk to people like, hey, you did this. And we'll see kind of later with Joseph's story, kind of where things kind of land with him and his brothers. But we need to know, people of God, we need to know that there is an accuser and he is the enemy of our souls, and we are not to stay silent when he is calling us things outside of who God has called us to be. That's just not it. We have to rise up, use our voices, use whatever faith we have while we're in that pit. And we have to declare the truth of God over ourselves first. And then one of the things, I'm a part of this mentorship group, and we were talking about the voice of the accuser last night. And one of the speakers, she's a lawyer. And one of the things that she was saying, it was so very, very good, is basically, anytime you're in the court of law and you have someone who is accusing you, it is their job to present evidence for what they're accusing you for. So the accuser will say things about you, but then there will be no evidence. But it's their responsibility to, this person is wrong because, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You don't have to try to prove your accuser wrong. But what we do have to do is we have to know the truth. So it's not our job to sit here and say, no, I am right, and this is how I am right, and this is who I am, and this is to them. It's their job to have to bring that proof. And if they can't bring the proof that we are who they say we are, then the judgment will not be in their favor. The judgment will be in our favor because they did not prove their case. And so you can't prove your case against me, even when I'm in this pit. Why? Because my Father is the judge. And so that's kind of the position that we have to take, especially as we know that God has called us to do something in these different spaces, whether it's in entrepreneurship, whether it's in family, mothering or fathering or pastoring or whatever the case may be, whether we're in the corporate or the office space. Our job is to differentiate between the voice of our Father and the voice of our accuser. And we have to be intentional about that. Otherwise, we put our own selves into the pit and we'll stay stuck there.
2 seconds. Well, it won't be 2 seconds, but adding to that, one of the things that was also spoken to me to add to that is sometimes, like, you just want to defend yourself and you want to make sure you're understood, but at the end of the day, it's like God is teaching you in this season that sometimes you won't be able to get a resolve. Like, being okay with not getting resolved. Thinking about with Joseph and applying it to this, just even if when coming out of the pit, if he had to fight for a resolve with his brothers, he would not have been able to advance. He had to be okay with not getting resolved. We're going to see that later. And even with us, yes, sometimes we're wrong. Yes, whatever the case may be. But at the end of the day, sometimes we have to be silent and fight the spiritual battle of not taking on, what my wife was saying, was taking on the identity that the enemy wants to put on us, and walking in faith, and just continuing to move forward and advance, and not allowing that to be a distraction, which is so interesting because now, even through this whole time, I'm thinking how the Just Be Bible study last week has so many implications on how this is being seen, lived out, of being able to advance. But I'll end there.
Yeah. So
Let
Matthew.
me say this.
Oh, go ahead.
And when it's just hard because we want to justify that we didn't do anything, but the Lord be trying to tell us, stand still.
Yeah.
He's going to work it all out because he knows the truth. Because when you're looking for other people to speak the truth, they won't speak it. They'll lie until the end. But if we stand still, be prayed up, and let him work it out, in the end, we will get the victory.
Yeah. I really want to look at Matthew 10, So in here, basically, Jesus is getting ready to send out the disciples. And so he's giving them kind of like marching orders. He's like, listen, you're going to encounter this. And when you do this. You're going to encounter that. And when you do this. Some people are not going to want to hear from you. And when that is the case, this is how you respond. So he's letting them know what they are going to face, because he is commissioning them. He's sending them out, basically. And so I just thought that that was such a wonderful parallel as we talk about advancement. And so as he's in the midst of giving them instructions on how they are to be, how they are to interact with others, what they can expect, the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between, in verse 16, he tells them, look, I am sending you out as sheep among wolves. So be as shrewd as snakes, or some say as wise as a serpent, and harmless as doves. I think one of Joseph's issues is that he had the harmless as dove part down, but he didn't have the wisdom at the time to know danger when it was near, to know when people's intentions for him were not good. And so as we are considering doing what God has called us to do in the workplace, in our homes, wherever, in whatever, you have to exercise wisdom. And the word tells us that if we lack wisdom, we can pray and he will give it to us in abundance. So when you're in the workspace and those people are trying to get under your skin, or, you know, that man or that woman is getting a little bit too personal or too close, or, you know, that boss is not supporting you in the way that you want him to, or somebody is trying to demean you or trying to sabotage your reputation or your character, or trying to imply or insinuate certain things about you, or when you're thinking about how you can manage all the things that God has called you to do while you're taking care of a toddler who is really busy, like, you have to be able to exercise wisdom. And when you're in those moments of overwhelm, when you're in those moments of darkness, when you can't see the light, when you're in those moments where you feel sealed off or cut off, you have to exercise wisdom. And you want to give wisdom as well as gentleness and grace and mercy. You need those things in tandem with each other. And so I really wanted us to see that. And then I also wanted us to scroll down to, or for those of us who are scrolling, but verse 26, but do not be afraid of those who threaten you, for the time is coming when everything that is covered will be revealed, and all that is secret will be made known to all. So this happened in Joseph's story. There will be a time where it is uncovered. And so there will be a time where you are hopefully publicly justified. Mm-hmm. You're publicly vindicated. However, that might not be the time right now, but the word of God says that there will be a time. So don't be afraid of those people. Don't shrink back from the accuser, the spirit of accusation, and then keep in mind that there will be a time. So that was the fifth one. There will be pits. The pits look nothing like the promise, but don't get discouraged. Ask yourself if God is preparing or preserving. There will be people, naysayers, who don't intend you any good. Pray for wisdom so that you don't walk into the traps of your accusers and your enemies. And then I also wrote, you will have to love, and I think Leslie mentioned this as well, you'll have to love and serve those who don't intend to do you good. Because the word calls us to love our enemies and to love those who have persecuted us in the same way that Jesus loved us. And that's hard. That's hard for me. It's hard for me. I'm gonna tell you the truth. It's hard for me.
So be mindful, I will add there, be mindful of what vows you make in those moments.
Okay, that was petty.
I was petty after the dog. But anyway, but just be mindful of the vows. I mean, hey, but just be mindful of the vows. Like, I'll never, or they better not ever ask me.
Better not. No.
It'll be a cold day in hell when. Like, be mindful. be mindful, because it might be those very same people God sends you back to
Mhm.
then go, and you have to it goes back to one of the be nots that I said. Be
Mhm.
not ignorant of the Satan's schemes and devices, or be not whatever. So like you have to be mindful, because you never know what the future assignment is going to be, just because the present assignment is you separate,
Yeah.
or you creating boundaries, or you creating like a space to where it's just like you have to heal from this. So yeah.
I love that you said that, because when we're talking about you gotta love people who don't intend good for you, the unsafe and the unhealthy thing to do is to love those people, though they've shown us continuously, in a way that does not place healthy, God-given, spirit-breathed boundaries.
Yeah.
That is okay. Boundaries are okay. You don't have to subject yourself to being abused. You don't have to subject yourself to be dominated by someone who is not godly, or someone who masquerades as godly when they're not. You know, you have the spirit of discernment.
Yeah.
You know. Okay, so God promises both preparation and preservation. Wait, God's promises both prepare and preserve us. Don't forget what he showed you. He prepares us for trials we don't anticipate or see. We would, this is funny to me, but we would like to think that preparing me for the pit would look like giving me this retractable ladder that I could just use to get out of that pit. But that's not always what God uses to prepare us, because that would have made sense. If I'm going into a pit, don't give me a promise. Give me a ladder. Give me a rope so I can climb up out of this thing. But God gave him that promise, and it was preparation for every place that he would go to until that promise was fulfilled. Was the journey long? Was the road hard? Oh, yes, indeed. However, the promise was preparation for the pit. And we don't like that. We want to skip over the pit and just go straight to the promise. But sometimes the preparation is the promise. And so, no, he's not going to give you a rope. No, he's not going to give you a hot air balloon. That's just not what he's going to do. And then, I love this. God rescues us from pits. There has never, and I just said this today as I was doing my kind of journal and devotional time, but there's never been a pit that I found myself in that God did not rescue me from. And so in Psalm 40:2, it says, I waited patiently for the Lord. He inclined to me and heard my cry. This pit is sealed off. Don't nobody hear you but Jesus. So he drew me up from the pit of destruction, out of the miry bog, and set my feet upon a rock, making my steps secure. Do we not see this with Joseph? If we're thinking ahead to where he's going, is this not parallel? And then the last thing, Proverbs 19:21, and I'll close with this and open it up for any questions or thoughts or discussions that you guys might have. But Proverbs 19:21 says, many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand. So keep this in mind as we're going through the pits, as we are finding favor in those dark moments. Many are the plans. They had many plans for Joseph, and none of them would prevail against the Lord's purpose for him. So keep that in mind as you continue to grow and as you continue to do what God has called you to do. Many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand.
Ooh, that last one. What comes to mind is just sometimes, like even with the promise that God gives us, he allows us to And usually the pit is the very first thing you encounter. You get this big promise, you get this big dream, you get this big, and the first thing you encounter is a pit. Why? It's because he has to renew your mind. You have to get the correct identity of who you are and who he is before he allows you to move forward. So sometimes it's like many are the plans, but it of man, but it is God's plans that is established, or what the verse just said. It's just sometimes he allows those pits because he's ripping us of our comforts. He's stripping us of from the privilege that we've had. He's removing things that would kind of be our identity or our go-to. So therefore, it's just like at the end of the day, you can say it was only God. Like I was just a vessel. I was just so we can only boast in the Lord, like Paul says, like, hey, I could say all these things, but honestly, I can only boast in the Lord for what he has done. Like, I'm only here because of what he allowed. Like, I didn't plan to get in a pit and then have to go through these other things just to get to Egypt. But God found favor, and I had favor in the pit to where I wasn't killed. I wasn't left to die. Uh I wasn't like cast off. Like this pit was, like you said, was a place of preservation, and it was a way for God to reroute the enemy's plan. Like you thought I was dead in this pit, just like Jesus. You thought I was dead in this grave. You thought you stripped me of everything. You thought you whatever, but no, like this was just a setup, and actually you fell into the hands of God to get me to where he wanted me to be. It's like, hey, have you considered my servants? Go ahead, because what you about to do, because I'm all knowing, is going to actually help me further the plan I have for them. So yeah, go ahead. Yeah, sure. Test them. Do it. Because guess what? The plans of like God's plans will prevail. He will never fail. So yeah, favor in the pit. He still makes it to Egypt. He would not have made it to Egypt without this pit. Sometimes like even, and I'll be done, it's like sometimes even I think about, yeah, just calling and purpose. It's like, like, yeah, got this dream, cool, woo. Okay, instruction, go in this, cut this off. But wait, like I need to, nope, my way or your way, which one are you gonna choose? And sometimes it's like you get stripped in so many different ways. It's like, I don't see, this does not look like just what she said earlier. Like this does not look like the promise, but also test your yes. It's great to have a yes when you hear, you see the glimpse of the end, but will you give him a continual yes to progress through the journey to actually get there, regardless of what challenges or obstacles you're going to have to face? So yeah, good Bible study.
Any thoughts? All right. Guess we can pray. Did you have any announcement or something?
Yeah, no, I don't think I have any because I did not think about that this time. I do apologize.
Okay, no problem.
But yeah, I don't have anything I can think of.
Okay. Harry, are you able to pray for us? Can you pray for us, please?
Father, in the mighty name of Jesus, we just come before you to say thank you for everything that you're doing. We're saying thank you for bringing us together, Father Lord, that we can look into the word. Thank you for the things that you've spoken into our lives, oh Father Lord. We just pray, Almighty God, that you continue to minister to us, the things that we have talked, the things that we've discussed from the word of God. Father, we just pray that you visit each and everyone participated in the Bible study. Father Lord, may you speak to them, oh God, in a way that they're able to hear. Speak to them, oh God, like how you speak to them, to where you can call them higher, to where, oh God, they can be able to pick out and understand where you are with their lives. Father, we pray for your grace and for your mercy, oh God, as we are living to do your will and to accomplish your purpose, oh God. We pray that you'll be with us in all seasons. We pray, Almighty Father, Lord, that you'll be everything. May you be all that we see, oh God, no matter the season we're in. We give you the glory and the honor. In Jesus' mighty name, we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Harry. Okay, guys, have a wonderful night, and we will see you all. Well, we'll see some of y'all in a couple of days, but we'll see y'all next week for a Bible study. Love you guys.
Love you too.
Love you. Good night.
All right.
Good
Hi.
night.
All right. Love you guys. Love y'all. Take care.
You too.